Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. There is no Dr. Sierra, so no pizza, no party. Sorry about that. And welcome to the residents. I had previously done two workshops on better presentations. These are based on a few books. And I will, well, you guys know, but since we have other people join us, I'm going to show those in a minute. I do have the handouts if you want to download it, if you care to download. Hopefully this QR code will work. I can catch my breath. I had to run upstairs. Don't worry, there are 205 slides, but we're not going to go over 200 slides. That's why it's called part one. Good, OK. So essentially, when we talked about like some techniques for how to build your PowerPoint presentations, we talked about color theory. These are the two books that we used. And for specifically data visualization, I like these three books, two of them by Jonathan Schwabish. If you guys remember, he has a PhD in economics. So his perspective is, so some of the examples I will show you is like sales and things like that. But it doesn't matter, because what you do with your data, it doesn't matter if it's clinical data or basic research or whatnot. And then the other one by Stephanie Evergreen, actually he brought it here. She has a PhD in outcomes research. So these are pretty good. And in general, we're going to talk about some principles first about data visualization, what are some best practices, and then we'll talk about some specific chart types. There are a ton of chart types out there. We couldn't possibly talk about every single chart type, but we'll try to talk about some of the most common ones. Okay. So before we, just to make sure we understand some of the principles beyond visual perception that drives a lot of the recommendations from these books, we're going to take a look. So essentially, here's some raw data in table. And I know we have a mathematician among us. So when you look at these data, what excites you? Oh, let me orient you to the data. So there are 4 sets of data. There are pairs of x and y, whatever they have measured. There are 11 observations for each pair. And they have calculated mean and variance for you, so you don't have to calculate it. So what do you notice? What about correlation? That's the most exciting. Is it the fact that they gave you the correlation, or the fact that the correlation is the same between the 4? The same, right? What else do you notice? So maybe you notice like all the x's are 8 except 1 on the last one. The other ones are more scattered. What if the x's are whole numbers and the y's are not, right? Like if you keep digging, you might notice other things. But isn't it disturbing that the mean and variance for all of the sets are the same? Exactly the same, even though it's like all kinds of numbers here. If you were to visualize this, since we're going to talk about data visualization today, this is what you get. So the first set, you get pretty much a scatter plot. Here's the regression line. So you can see that pretty much more or less the data points are around the regression line. The second one is kind of like there's like a going up and then going down, but still somewhat around the regression line, right? This third one looks like most of them are very close to the regression line, but there's one outlier out there, right? So if you were to look at it, you may want to investigate what is that outlier. Was it an error, right? Or is it a true outlier in your data? And then the fourth one is really disturbing. Like most of them are stacked on top of each other. And then one that's an outlier, but the outlier is actually exactly on the regression line, right? The point of this is that when you looked at your raw data, it was difficult to see these differences, right? Even though they all had the same mean and variance. So data visualization is important because when you visualize your data, you may discover things that you couldn't have by doing the math. Okay. Now, these are some basic principles when it comes to data visualization. So as humans, this is how our brain, without thinking about it, how we process information. So proximity, right? So if things are close to each other, you kind of consider them their own group, right? So how many groups do you think there are here? 2, right? So you can see like these are in their proximity, and then there's a group over there. So keep that in mind. Similarity, so if I were to have the colors the same, it makes it even more obvious. So obviously there are 2 colors, so 2 groups of data here. Enclosure, if I draw a circle, makes it clear that even if there are data that we haven't collected, so if you were to collect one more data point and it lands here, you know it belongs to the blue group. So enclosure, our brains process it as different groups. Closure. So sometimes you may have missing data. So you see this graph. So without thinking too much, if you were to imagine how this graph looks like if we were to fill in the data, what would you see? Don't think too much. What do you see? So this will be connected to here? No. So it will go down here and then up? So if you don't think about it, it will be a straight line. So in a fraction of a second, you just think about it, you see a straight line, okay? But it could be that it would be another peak. So sometimes missing data is important. So if it's missing data, you want to be careful, because if you don't show it or if you don't know what it is, the default is the shortcut, the shortest distance, okay? So that's the principle of closure. Continuity. So if you have a set of data just continuous, you kind of see them. So for example, this one is, they're all aligned around the base. So you don't necessarily need an x-axis. So your brain just knows that these are all on the same line. So this is called continuities because they just go in order. The next one is connection, okay? So when you look at this scatter plot, how many groups do you see? Because now proximity doesn't work very much because they're all over the place. So how many sets of data do you think there is in this picture? There is no right or wrong answer. So it's hard, it's difficult to figure it out, right? What if I change the color? So now I'm doing the similarity, because the first principle didn't work, so then I went to the similarity. I changed the color. So at least you can say there are 2 sets of data, right? But is it easy to follow whether they're going up or down? You have to work really hard, right? So the concept of connection is sometimes you may need to connect it to make it easier for the eyes of the audience to follow where the data is going. So this is connection. So anyway, because when we talk about different chart types, these principles, you should have this in the back of your mind. So when you choose charts, it has to be intentional for the data that you're using and the story that you're going to tell with your data, okay? Now, these are pre-attentive attributes. So without thinking too much, the human eye will go to something that's different. So for example, shape, if you consider this part, all these shapes are square, so automatically your attention goes to this shape because it's different, okay? Or if I put enclosure, if I put a box in here, your eyes automatically go to the box. You're wondering, why is there a box there? Or if I bolded the border of this box, your eyes go there because it's different. Or if there is a saturation difference, so there is a darker color, your eyes go there, right? Color, and there are other things. So these are some techniques that we're going to see with specific charts that you can do in order to bring the attention of the audience to the part of the data that you want them to pay attention to as you're telling your story with your data. Okay, the other ones are not that common, so I'm just going to go to the next one. Here's a table. You guys love tables, right? It's a raw table. Stanley loves tables, right? How do you like this table? Let me orient you to the table. So here we're looking at 4 quarters, and I guess our sales, how much sale each person did each quarter, right? So what stands out to you? Who sold the most in each quarter? You have to spend some time to figure it out, right? That's painful for the audience. So what you can do, what if I change the color? Now you can see that in quarter one, Lauren had the most sales. You can also consider which quarter Lauren had the most sales. It was the first quarter, right? So it's easier. So the point is you can be intentional about highlighting the point, the part of the data that you're going to talk about in order to make it easier for the audience. Now that's the color change. What if instead if I'm not going to talk about the rest of the numbers and they're less important, what if you dim them out so that nobody's paying attention to it? So this becomes even more powerful. Okay. So in general, you can do things to bring attention, but you have to be intentional. So when you look at this picture, your eyes probably automatically go to the red, right? The red is, I guess for humans, if you were to live in the nature, you will, like fruits are, colorful, so you're attracted to it. But if you do it all over the place without intention, then your eyes don't go anywhere specific, right? It's all over the place. So you want to be intentional about where you use these techniques to essentially control the attention of your audience. So don't do this. Don't put colors everywhere. Okay. Now we're going to talk about, those are like some underlying principles. We're going to talk about some specific principle for data visualization. So it doesn't matter, like there are a ton of data visualization textbooks out there. If you pick up any of them, they're pretty much going to agree on some of on these principles. So these are like pretty fundamental. So when you look at this chart, we're looking at time on the x-axis, and every line, I don't have a legend here, so let's say each line is a different country. So average year of schooling has increased around the world. Every color is a different country. Do you guys want a legend for this? So it depends on what you're trying to tell, the story that you're trying to tell with your data. So if I'm going to talk about only these countries, I can dim the rest of it, because that's a distraction, and just focus on, I'm going to talk about Germany, United States, Spain, Mexico, China, Nepal. Now, it's not as distracting, right? And you can say that, oh yeah, in our data set, we have data from all of the countries, or at least these countries that are here, but they're irrelevant to the presentation. So show the relevant data is the first principle. Principle number 2 is reduce the clutter. Okay. Now, I guess sometime in the 90s, I was a child. I'm telling you from what they say in the book. In the 90s, 3D figures become a big thing because they're like, oh, look, we have computers, we can do 3D things. So as a result, to this date, Excel and PowerPoint can do anything 3D. It's a very bad idea to do anything 3D. It was cute in the 90s. It just adds to confusion, right? Because, this is tilted. If I were to measure the height, I need to walk into the screen, orient myself to the direction of these, and it's completely unnecessary. It's adding clutter because you're adding a third dimension. That's absolutely unnecessary. So if you were to learn one thing today is don't do anything 3D. Pie chart, bar charts, you name it. Anything, Excel has a 3D version of it, right? Don't do it. This is better, 2D. Literally, the same information. I see with this, I don't need to walk into the screen and orient myself because it's straightforward, okay? Now, I took this screenshot. I went to a conference, ECMIT, not in the 90s, but in 2024. And this 3D pie chart was used. I took the opportunity to use it as an example of what not to do. It's a bad idea. There are many other things with that, many other things wrong with that pie chart, but 3D was one of them. Now, you want to integrate the graphics and text. So how do you do that? You first remove legends, okay? and I'm going to show you why. Remove legends when possible and label data directly. So for example, this graph that I showed you earlier, so the first problem was that it has irrelevant data. So if you remove the irrelevant data, so what's deemed here, now you end up with your relevant data, and by default, it will give you a legend. Now, anytime you have more than 2 things in your legends, you have to keep going back and forth, right? So if I'm looking at the data, then I need to go back and say, OK, what was orange again? Spain. So it's essentially in the way of interpreting the data, because you have to go back and forth. So the better way to do it is to delete your legend, put it right next to the graph. So if I'm literally looking at orange, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. This is going up. And obviously, that's Spain, because it's right there. I don't need to go back and go through all the legends and figure out what was orange. So, and you can see that across all. It doesn't matter what kind of data chart you use. You can use this principle. Now, what if you have only 2? So 2 is not that bad, right? Because it's only 2. Like, in fact, if you just look at the legend, you're going to remember, right? Because obviously, Germany is green, and the other one is United States. So even with 2, you can still do better. So you can either like put it on the bar, so people don't have to go up there. So you can even put it here. But you might say, well, what if I was looking down there and I forgot what green is? Another thing that they usually recommend, it's a good idea. What if you just delete the legend and just put it in your title? So if your title already said Germany and United States, you just change the color of it right there. That becomes your legend. So that's much neater and easier and more clean. OK, the other thing you can do is write the title like a newspaper headline, right? How many times we say correlation between time and growth, right? You don't draw a conclusion. You can actually put your conclusion in the title so that if somebody missed your conclusion and they're just trying to interpret the data now, so they missed what you said, and now they're trying to look at the data and they may miss the point. If your conclusion is already incorporated into the title, and here's what I mean. So essentially, instead of saying labor force participation rate, right, that could be the title, instead you actually make it a conclusion. The participation rate has risen for women, fallen for men. So that's, and it doesn't take you, so when I say conclusion, I don't mean put a paragraph as your title. Like, it has to be very short, but you can actually put it as a punchline. Next, they say you can add explainers, and this is, especially if you have posters, if you're doing data visualization for posters, you can add explainers. So here's what I mean. So if you have a chart that's, there are like fine details here, so you don't want to make it too crowded. You can, but it might be something important, like something historically happened. You can actually add like some explanation. So if you're no longer at your poster, and somebody stopped by, they can understand. Oh, I see why these specific peaks and troughs were important in your graph. Okay. Now, again, you have to be careful. Take these with a grain of salt. Don't. Probably not a good idea to do this on your PowerPoint presentation because it's going to be small font. But for posters might be a good idea. Fourth principle is avoid the spaghetti chart. Who likes the spaghetti chart? Have you heard of the spaghetti chart? You know who loves spaghetti chart? The CDC. The CDC absolutely loves spaghetti chart. So does this look like spaghetti to you? Like somebody threw spaghetti? Like, why? They have put so many graphs on top of each other. Let me zoom in, actually. OK, here's the x-axis. We're looking at time. And there are 2 y-axes. Should I focus on the left first or on the right? You should never have 2 y-axes. That's another thing, another takeaway. Always stick to just one y-axis, because like this line, I have to spend some time to figure out if this line is based on the left axis or the right axis. It's a very bad idea. And the spaghetti part is like, they have put multiple types of data on top of each other. Yes?
What if you're giving a presentation and you have multiple slides and you just add each layer
That could work, but why not just show them one at a time, like on a separate. And again, I say take these with a grain of salt. So you have to see what you're doing and what works best with your story. In general, CDC has a problem with spaghetti because I have seen this is in MMWR. You can pull up this paper if you want to have a reference. What they do is a lot. So nowadays, as I'm reading papers, the moment I see a bad chart, I'm just taking a screenshot and use it in this. It's very easy because they're all over the place. Okay, but anyway, so you can do multiple small panels. That's easier to interpret. Okay, start with gray, right? Because Excel and PowerPoint love colors. So when you first make a chart in either Excel or PowerPoint, they essentially the same system, it's going to have the default colors. And then you're tempted to just go in there and label them. And there is a legend here. So they say a good idea is before you do anything, just make everything gray. Don't worry about the colors. Just make it gray. And then ask yourself, what is the story you're going to tell here? And based on that story, just highlight the data that matches your story. So if this is the line I'm about to talk about, OK, that's my story. I'm going to make it bold and red and make sure those visual principles we talked about. Now your attention goes to that line, and you're going to ignore everything else. And then, sure, based on your study, if you needed to talk about the other ones later, you can. But they're not as the main story. You can still have them. And of course, you want to get rid of the legend and put it next to them. So that looks much better. Here's an example. So this was in New England Journal of Medicine in just past November. So I took a screenshot. So this is good, right? So they're only showing you the relevance. So they're talking about positive tests. This is for the Marburg virus. If there's an outbreak in certain countries. So they're looking at positive tests, recovered patients, death, and patients followed in the isolation and treatment center. So they have deleted the legend. They put them next to the lines, right? So this is relatively pretty good. It's hard to find this type of graph from the CDC. CDC doesn't. No disrespect to the CDC. OK, so those are some general principles. Let's talk about some chart types. So we probably only have time to talk about 2 categories. But before we do that, so this graph is helpful because it kind of ranks different chart types. So the higher you go on this, the more accurate the audience will take away from the chart. The lower you go is a bad idea. So as you can see, 3D things are down here anytime volume is involved, right? So you want to go as high as possible. But again, take it with a grain of salt. So you have to see in your situation which chart works best with your data and with the story that you're going to tell. But in general, it's a good idea to go higher on this hierarchy because it will be easier to communicate your data to your audience. OK, don't panic. There is a cool website, Chart Guide, that you can do. It's interactive. You can actually, it can help you choose the right chart for your data. Has anyone used this? Have you guys heard of it? It's free. Or at least it was free when I looked at it. Things change all the time. Like people give you free things, and then they say you have to subscribe. But anyway, so I try to categorize them into 6 categories. And we probably only have time to talk about these 2. So the first category, and the ones that are red are the ones that I'm going to talk about. And we can't talk about every single chart. And this is not exhaustive by any means. There are a ton of other types of chart. But so if you visualize your data, you need to ask yourself, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to show like a part to whole? That's when pie charts come in. Are you comparing categories? Now, one thing I want to emphasize, because today I'm going to talk about the category of comparing categories. This is as long as you are not have a time component. So anytime you are showing things over time, you should go to this category of time. Those are much better. So if you're showing things over years or over time, you don't want to use the charts in comparing categories. And then, of course, there's distribution when you need to see how your data is distributed. uncertainty and things like that. Relationship, so that's where you can do your scatter plot that we saw earlier with the regression and things like that. And you don't always have quantitative data. So if you have qualitative data, you can make things like diagrams, things like that too. But again, I think we only have time to talk about these two. So we'll see. So I made this. So which one do you guys want to? Oh, you want to choose your own adventures because I can click on these. Part to whole or comparing categories? Part to whole is shorter. Okay. Okay, I'll click on this one. Okay. Everybody here has anyone not used the pie chart? It's a safe environment. If you have not used the pie chart, you are my hero. So nobody has not used. So obviously, PowerPoint, Excel, you can just insert pie chart. Of course, there's a 3D version of pie chart. There are donuts. Essentially, they're pie chart with the hole in there. And then it gets complicated. So you have sunburst and also tree map. I'll probably talk about tree maps too. Probably of everything here, tree maps are the way to go if you were to do part to whole visualization. So here's why. The problem with pie charts are a very bad idea. Sorry about that. Pie charts are everywhere. They're a very bad idea. 3D pie charts, the worst idea. Here's the problem. Humans cannot easily compare different sized slices. Okay? It's not clear how we perceive the quantities in each pie. Are you judging it by theta, the angle? Right? Do you guys like the theta? Or is it the area of each slice? Or is it the arc length? You can. So there are three ways to look at it, right? The angle, the area, or the arc length. So it's not clear. So, and doesn't matter which one. We, as humans, we are very bad to judge it. Like, is orange and green the same size? Or is one bigger? It's difficult. But if you turn this exact same chart into a column chart, like on the right, it's clear. I don't have to guess. I know red is the largest one. Between green and yellow that I wasn't sure, I know green is large. Actually, green and even between green and between purple and yellow, I wasn't so sure in the pie chart, but it's clear in the column. So why make a pie chart? It's absolutely unnecessary. Like the only time it's okay to do pie chart is like the rest of it is not important. You're just going to highlight one piece of it. Like, oh, look, 75 to 90% of UTIs are E. coli. Use a pie chart because nobody cares about the rest of it. You put E. coli. But if you're going to put like every, I don't know if I have an example. But you saw an example earlier with that 3D pie chart. So donut is even worse because now I don't have theta. I really like my theta. I don't know how to measure the angle anymore because the origin is missing. Now, people like donut charts because everybody sees pie charts. Donuts are different. So like, ooh, that's fancy, right? But more importantly, you can put a number in there. So, again, if you were to highlight a single number, probably donut charts are the way to go because you can deem the rest of it and highlight the one number you want to talk about and put that number in the middle of the donut hole. So for that reason, but anything else, like this example, is a bad idea because people cannot really compare. So you might as well use a column or bar chart. I talked about this. It gets worse. This is pi of pi. So essentially, not only I don't know if this green is bigger or purple, probably green is bigger, but then they said this whole thing, we're going to do another pi on this. And 11 and 11 doesn't add to 100%, but it looks like 50-50. So it may.
11 and 11 doesn't even add to 23.
Yeah, bad idea. Bad idea. Don't do pi of pies. Oh, I found some examples from what conference is this? This is probably ID week. Okay, here's some. Here's pie chart and some donut charts, and here's a donut of donuts. Donut of donuts. Actually, multiple them. But it gets complicated. But again, take this with a grain of salt. Maybe the story you're telling, maybe pie charts and donut charts work well with your story. But in general, they say it's a bad idea because this is too much clutter. OK, what was I going to do here? So there's some research that shows that so Excel and PowerPoint, by default, they put a white line here. They say that's actually a bad idea. They found that if you were to ask people, it makes people think that the data is not stable and there's like disjointed. So if you were to use a pie chart, they say remove this white line so it doesn't look separate. OK, it's a small thing. Second, they say people usually like clocks. So you may want to use at noon, start at noon. I guess that's noon or midnight, I don't know. And then go from largest to smallest one. Unless you have a 90 degree. They say, OK, like if this space is 90 degree, maybe tilted so the 90 degree lands exactly like this. That way it's clear. Like I couldn't say this is 90 degrees here, but when they rotated it, now I know this is 90 degrees. OK. So avoid pie charts, but if you must use a pie chart, there are some things you can do to improve it. OK. This is a bad idea. So there are tree maps. So if you must use a pie chart, you may as well use tree maps. So tree maps are essentially pie charts, but they're squares. So I don't have to worry about the angle. I don't have to worry about the arc length. I know it's the area, and humans are much better estimating areas of squares than pies, unless it's pizza. I think we all know which slice of pizza we want, but in pie chart, I'm not so sure. And then sunburst, it gives you, now sunburst, sometimes it might be useful just because you may go into subcategories. So these are, all of these are subcategories of this. So it may have some utility. But in general, in a PowerPoint presentation, that's going to be very difficult to communicate your data. But it does exist. So that was part 2 whole. Next, we'll go to comparing categories. So this one is a little longer. The good old column and bar charts. So essentially, if it's vertical, it's called the column chart. If it's horizontal, it's called bar chart. I may just call all of them bar chart just so we don't get confused. They're all the same. It's just a matter of whether you rotate it or not. All the principles are the same for column charts and bar charts. OK. So here's we have a column chart, different countries, and they're looking at total population. I don't know when this data was, so this may not be accurate, but that doesn't matter. And of course, we know how to do the column. So there is, in Excel, you can do column. There is 3D version of it, right? And then, so there is a column, and the bars are horizontal, also comes in 3D. And then there are 2 versions, right? So usually, you can have just, each category, its own column, or you can have pairs. Right, so if you, a lot of the times I think in in clinical research you need to do pairs. So group intervention and control, what have you. So here's an example. So let's say there are more women than men in each country except for Ethiopia. So men red, women blue. So this is an example of those pairs, right? How do you like this chart? Perfect. So what you can do is, because there's a lot of things to look at here, right? So one suggestion is, instead of doing this, because if the whole point is to compare men and women, why not just graph the difference? Because if you're trying to see if there are more men or women in each country, so here they have graphed just the difference. So the difference, the difference between number of women and men. Now, this is probably not as much useful in our research. Another thing that's, I think, more useful for our types of research is the slope graph. So here's an example. So again, they are economist, so the data is based on sales. So let's say you have a new store and an old store, and you're looking at each department and how much were the sales based on the new site and the old site. So essentially what you can do instead of this, because this is too much clutter, you can do a slope graph. So essentially the old site and new site. So then you, for each department, you can see if there was a increase or a decline. So it makes it easier. Like here you can quickly see that everything is going up, but the cheese department, I guess they have a cheese department, is declining, right? Whereas, was it easy to see that here? It's not as easy. You need to spend some time to figure out, oh yeah, obviously the cheese has gone down in the new side, which is, but first of all, you have to go back to the legend to figure out what orange was, right? So this makes it easier. So I think this is underappreciated, the slope graphs. They're very easy to make in Excel. We probably won't have time today, because I also have exercise files that we can find, but I don't think we'll have time to, so we'll do it in part two. But it's so easy to make this, and it's not the default. The problem is it's not the default. So almost, I don't think you have ever made a graph in Excel and ended up as a slope, because it's not the default. You just have to switch the axes. So another thing you can do, instead of those pairs, you can do back-to-back bars. So here, we're looking at comparison, two groups, comparison and treatment, looking at 8th grade, 10th grade, and so instead of putting two bars next to each other for 8th grade, 10th grade, and 12th grade, they're just putting it back to back. That way it's easier not only to see, so you can see like blue is larger than gray, but also you can compare all the blues and all the gray. So it makes it easier, back to back. This one is not easy to make in Excel. But there is a hack that I will show you probably in part two. Because once you learn the hack, then you just have to do some ninja tricks in there, and then it becomes very easy to make. OK, so for bar charts and column charts in general, so these are some recommendations that I have. So when possible, sort the data in your bar charts. So for example, if you have this, I have to go back and forth, right? Like which one has the, like the largest and the smallest is easy to find quickly, but beyond that, I don't know what is the third largest one. So you have to spend some time. But if you sort it like this, it's clear. So I know, this all goes in order. So always sort your data. Again, if it works with your story and with your data, so this is a better practice. Second, they say start the axis at 0, because sometimes charts become dishonest if you don't have 0. So if, for example, you start at 50, so sometimes we are tempted to do this because the chart was too big, you couldn't fit it in the slides. Like, I'm just going to chop it at 50. But this chart is dishonest because it sounds like this is several times larger than Italy, right? Whereas the actual looks like this. Or another good example is looks like this is at least twice as big as this, but in reality it's not. So your chart becomes dishonest. So you want to be careful anytime you truncate is the word for this. So don't truncate. Sometimes it's fine. So you have to look at before and after you truncate. If you think data is not lost, it's fine. But in general, you don't want to truncate it. Next, they say don't break the bar. That's another, I guess you could call this truncating too. So this is like, so China and India, this is based on population. This is older data. India has more people than China now. But essentially, if you wanted to better compare these, you want to zoom in. So one thing people do is they truncate those two. This is dishonest. So they're saying don't do this because now this graph doesn't. So if you wanted to focus, you might as well just remove these two. That way, the rest of it is easier to see. You see, because these bars are not, yes?
Wait, so I guess I'm confused. So what did I see the squiggles, but what did
they chopped off a portion of this to make it shorter. And that's what they mean by here. They're saying, oh, we just shortened this. So what they at least being honest that we cut this, but this graph is not accurate anymore. So if you were to do this, just remove China and India. What they wanted to do is to make it easier to compare these, because that's not very easy, because these are very tiny. But the way to do it is to remove China and India. Unless your story was talking about China and India, then you should stick with this picture. This is not accurate. Okay, next they have use tick marks and grid lines judiciously. So you see all these, like these add clutter. So this is unnecessary, and by default they're usually added there, or these grid lines, right? They're totally unnecessary. So you can get rid of them, makes it cleaner. So you see the tick marks are gone now. Sometimes you can use tick marks, if it goes with your story. So if you wanted to group these, there is utility for tick marks, but not for this, because of course we know each of these are a column. You don't really need those. And of course, you can bring the attention to the part of the data that you're telling a story. So if you're talking about Italy, you can just make the color different. And then fifth recommendation is rotate long axis label. So for example, if you have something like this, and this is very long, it's not easy to read like this. So if you rotate it, this is much easier to read. Right? Do you guys agree? Does it look easier to look at this compared to this? Right? And we did nothing else other than just flip it. So you may need to play with it. So sometimes it takes experimentation. So if you make a chart, just try something, and then if it looks better and it makes it easier, you may go with that. I think most charts I see, people usually go with the vertical, because I think that's first. When you click, first you have your column charts and then bar charts down. I don't know if that's the reason, but I hardly see people use this, but it can be easier to read. Sixth one is avoid radial and circular bar charts if possible. Again, we're looking at angles, and we're not good at angles. So things like this. Now I have to go around an angle and then decide the length of each one, right? That's a very bad idea. It looks fancy, but your audience has to sit there and figure out what you're trying to communicate. I'll give you an example from the Lancet Infectious Diseases. This is adverse effects of vaccines. I think I showed you guys this last time, okay? I have to go around the circle and then figure out, the legends are down here. So while I'm navigating the circle, I need to go back and forth between the legend and then figure out, the length of each. It looks fancy. The Lancet liked it. The Lancet definitely liked this, because nobody has seen a chart like this before. But if you were presenting this, your audience will be confused, and you would take 5 minutes to decipher the graph. Here's another bad example, right? Because now I don't know, is like these two, technically I think, are they equal, or is Germany more? The mathematician would say Germany more, right? Because you would calculate, but is that what you're supposed to do here? I don't know. So bad idea. Seventh is avoid bar charts if there's a time component. So I mentioned there is a whole category for time. So anytime there is time, for example, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, don't use bar chart. There are other charts that are much cleaner. This is too much clutter. And I think I have seen these charts a lot. So people just, you did your research over the past 4 years, and you're comparing rate of resistance for MRSA. I see people use column charts. It's too much clutter. I mean, you get your data, but it's not the best way to communicate your data. Eighth is break stacked bar chart apart so that each series sits on its own vertical baseline. So here's what is stacked. So stacked is essentially each bar has its own components. Have you guys done this before? The problem with this is that I can easily compare the orange line, right? Because they're aligned. I cannot judge the blues, right? Are these two the same? They look the same to me, but I don't know because they're not aligned. That's the problem with stacked bar charts, because you can only truly compare the first category. The rest of them, you're out of luck. So if you're out of luck, that means that this is bad data visualization. So if you break it, then each of them you can, and you can do this in Excel, right? Not by default. By default, Excel will give you this. And then you can do some manipulation to get this out of it. And this is easy because now I can clearly compare blues. And then somebody would say, but also I wanted to not only compare the categories, but also the total, right? So if you break it now, I can no longer compare the total. That's fine. So just add the total right next to it. So you can compare the total, and then you can compare each category. So this is the way to go anytime you have stacked bars. What was I trying to do here? Oh, make sure when you break it, be consistent with the length. So don't drag and drop them so that they're not. So you just want to be consistent with the size of each when you break it. Another one is when the total doesn't matter, because the total, all of them are going to be to 100%. So anytime you have percent, like survey data is a good example of this, like what percentage of people said, agree, disagree, whatnot. So when you do that, you still can break it. And of course, the total doesn't matter, because of course, the total is going to be 100%. And the other cool thing, I'm going to skip. This is a bad example from the Lancet again. But anyway, they have done stacks. These are, you see, so this was published in 2024. And it's difficult to compare these. The first one is OK, because they're aligned. But the second ones, you cannot. With surveys, you can do something else. So because you might agree and disagree, so they go in one direction or another, you can actually align them in the center. So you can say, OK, so here's the baseline is right in the middle, and then disagree or strongly disagree goes to this way, and agree to strongly agree goes the other way. So this is a better way to do it instead of aligning each segment. And what if you had neutral in your data for your Likert scale? So if you put neutral, this is tricky, because what if the neutral is not symmetric? It may be throwing your data off. So sometimes they say, why don't you put neutral to the side and then do the agree and disagree in the middle? So this is more accurate representation of your data. OK. And OK, so those were in general bar charts. Lollipop is still a bar chart. It's just you make it fancier. So instead of a bar, what if you make this narrower and you put the circle at the end? It's called a lollipop. So if you wanted your presentation to stand out, it's a good idea, because nobody's doing lollipop. You guys seen lollipop charts? It's not in Excel by default, but you just have to manipulate your chart. So you just change the length of it, and there's an option to add the circle at the end of your bar. But so it's doable in PowerPoint and Excel, and it might help you stand out. Or sometimes if you wanted to put a number in there, that circle, you can make it bigger, and you can put the number in there if you want to get rid of your axis. Here's unit chart. So essentially, you can use this is in showing you like 100 million, 57 million in 2015. So each square will have a unit of number, so you just stack them on top of each other. So that's one way to do it. Other things is use bands. Because bands are effective. I'll let you read that. You can use pictograms. You can make pictograms in Excel, by the way. But it's a little more difficult. But we'll try to make a pictogram next time. But pictogram essentially shows, so you can have icons, and the number of icons represent your data like this. So if 14%, this is 14%, this is 47%. You can totally do this in Excel, but there's no default option, so you have to do some tricks. And this is a waffle. So the waffle is similar to that earlier chart, but it just shows you 100%, and it shows you what percentage out of 100%. It's kind of like pictograms, but it goes like a waffle. And then Sankey diagrams, which Excel cannot make. But I want to show you because a lot of journals like Sankey. Have you guys seen Sankey diagrams? Journals in recent time, they really like this. Have you seen this, Paul? No? So essentially, this shows you the flow. So let's say if you started with 52, and you can kind of show the flow. So here's an example. So let's say you did a research of the people who had first-line antibiotics. How many of them ended up later switching to cephalosporin first line? But it shows you the flow. So sometimes, yeah, unfortunately, Excel cannot, to my knowledge, Excel cannot make this yet. So, but there are some online tools you can use to make it. So for like you put this in your manuscript, the journals will think twice before they say no, because like, oh, that's shiny. But I see this in JAMA, Lancet. They really like this kind of graph. Here's another example. So this was Hep C. So let's say there were 363 patients. No retreatment for 69 of them, retreatment for 294 of them. 210 of them had sustained virologic response. 30 had relapse. Of the 30, later they got sustained virologic response. Some of them had more relapse. Like you can do like creative things. Might be interesting for your presentation, for your poster. If you're doing a poster, might look really good on posters. But anyway, here's another example. Okay, so that was. Oh, we did good on time. Let me click. So next time we'll do visualizing data over time, and then distribution data, relationship data, tables. And let me just click on the closure. OK, so hopefully, here's what you took away. Visualize relevant data to make it easier to understand by reducing the clutter, integrating the graphics and text, and avoiding the spaghetti charts, but without misleading your audience, right? So you don't truncate and things like that. Avoid 3D charts of any kind. Not just pie charts. Think twice before using pie charts. And these are some tools that you can use for data visualization. So there are a bunch. So Canva can do a lot of these. It's free. You can use Canva. Obviously, Excel can do a lot. And I think Excel is underappreciated. That's why I'm trying to do more Excel. But there are other tools you can use. Just Power BI. Power BI is also free. But Power BI is similar to Excel. But Excel can make Sankey charts if you want. Some of you are Adobe users. I forget who was Photoshop. Do you do Illustrator too?
I love Illustrator.
No?
I love Illustrator.
Oh, you love? OK, so you don't need Excel. Just go directly to Illustrator. And there's R and Python that you can use. Or they're showing you the more you go to the right, the more difficult it is to learn it. OK, what question do you guys have? What question do you have? Is it about pie charts?
Yeah.
Yes?
Well, outside of Excel, do you have a favorite program that you use?
I use R.
How about one from each spectrum of the...
I would like to use Illustrator one day. I do not have your skills at the moment, but I mostly use Excel. I use Canvas sometimes. And PowerPoint, I'm trying to increase my knowledge of PowerPoint. I'm sorry, Power BI, not PowerPoint, Power BI. I have not used Tableau. Tableau is not free. Or at least there is a free version, but if you use the free version, your data goes public. You have to upload your data on their website, and I don't want my data on their website. But Power BI, you can download it on Mac and PC free. The full, and Power BI, it gets updated monthly. So every month, they're adding new features to it. And there is a paid version of Power BI that's web-based. I have not used the rest of these things. Python and R are similar, but I have seen more people use. Of course, R does statistical analysis too. So R has unlimited power. The same with Python. They can do like all your statistical analysis, but also they have data visualization libraries. So and all free. Python and R free. Absolutely free. But it's to the right of the spectrum. So you will have a lot of pain learning how to use them. Other questions? Well, I think that's all the time we had. Thank you. We'll see you guys for part 2, I think, next month. Thank you.